It's one of the world's most recognisable heritage sites. For centuries it's intrigued us and kept many of its secrets hidden.
Scientists have long puzzled over the relationship Stonehenge has with the sun, the long shadows cast during winter, and the ancient celebrations of the summer solstice still marked today.
New research led by our very own Phil Harding on a site several miles away is shedding new light on the mystery, and Phil's here to talk about it.
It's the greatest find of my career. I cannot show it to you because it's not there, but I know it's there.
Welcome to the Time Team Podcast.
Yes, welcome to the Time Team Podcast with Helen, Geake and Martyn Williams, where we bring you exciting news from Stonehenge, possibly the most iconic prehistoric site in the country. Stonehenge is located on the vast Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. It's an incredibly complicated monument, but its main feature is a unique ring of enormous interconnected standing stones, and the whole thing dates back around 5,000 years.
Now, earlier, Helen and I were invited along to a press conference given at Wessex Archaeology by Phil Harding. He's been working on excavating a structure some 5 kilometres, 3 miles that is, from Stonehenge, which may have served as an early prototype for the alignment with the solstice at Stonehenge.
What they found was evidence of 2 post pits that held huge wooden posts that, when they line up, point to the solstice, sunrise and sunsets in just the same way as the stones of Stonehenge do. But crucially, they date to before Stonehenge began doing this, 5 centuries before the first stone was set up, when Stonehenge was just a series of earthworks on Salisbury Plain.
Well, I am delighted to say that we can talk to Phil Harding from Wessex Archaeology right now. Phil, hello. Welcome to the Time Team Podcast.
Oh, it's great to see some rather familiar faces.
It's lovely to have you here, Phil. Your first trip to the podcast.
I know.
And what a moment to join us with an incredible discovery to talk about. Why is this such an incredible discovery?
It's the first, I guess. I mean, I keep saying it. It doesn't matter how long you spend in archaeology, every now and again, a life changer comes along and you hope that it's going to happen in your career. And I've been in archaeology now, 60 years or something like that. It's taken 60 years for me for this big story like this to come along. And I feel totally privileged. I feel honoured. Not only did I lead the excavations there, so much of what I did and what we found, I actually dug it up myself. And you can imagine, I don't do it so much now, but getting in a hole was probably what I always liked to do more than anything else. So to actually do firsthand the finding of the artefacts and recovering it was just amazing. But when I say about the first, as far as I can see, it is the first instance where Neolithic peoples accurately plotted and captured the rising of the sun on midsummer, and at the same time we're able to plot the descent of the winter, the midwinter sunset. It is the same process that you get at Stonehenge, but at Bulford is 500 years earlier than what you see at Stonehenge. Most people know about the sunrise and the sunset at Stonehenge, but that is all related to the Sarsen monument, the big stones, which so many people think about as being Stonehenge. But you've got to remember that Stonehenge was 500 years old itself by the time those Sarsen stones came in. So what we were finding at Bulford was related to the first construction phases of Stonehenge. And what it proves is that they had the ability to chart the movement of the sun right from the word go. Perhaps something similar to what we got at Bulford may also have been incorporated into the first designs of Stonehenge. We really don't know, because the interior of Stonehenge has been done over so many times by people redesigning it and rebuilding it. There are just thousands of holes inside Stonehenge, and it's impossible to notice which ones would allow you to reconstruct that solstitial alignment.
The wonderful thing about your discoveries at Bulford, though, Phil, is partly that you were out there, you were digging the relevant post pits and so on. But the actual discovery came later on, didn't it? It was one of those cliches that the great archaeological discoveries are always made in the lab or the library.
You know what archaeology is like, Helen, because, you find something, but like you say, it's only in that post-excavation period where you start analysing the material that some of the greatest discoveries are actually made. One of the two post pits that we found, the two post pits that make up this alignment, I actually excavated one, and I checked back through the archive once I got my thoughts together, and I realised that when I dug it, I hadn't put it down as a refuse pit. I did actually put it down as a post pit. And so at the time of digging it, I got the interpretation right. It was only the other one, the second one, that it took a bit more time to register. And that happened because that pit was so much bigger in volume than any of the others. And I went, wow, why is it so big? And then looking at the shape of it, it's like a truncated cone. Most of the rubbish pits we got close on 50 rubbish pits on the site. They're what I call cylindrical. They got straight sides to them. The two post pits are like a truncated cone. And once I got that idea into my head that maybe this was another post pit, then I reached for my pencil and ruler and I just drew a line and then projected it way across the landscape, because I knew, if you're only 5 kilometres away from Stonehenge, it's probably just such a basic question. How does that alignment relate to the solstitial alignment at Stonehenge? And I got the results back, and they're parallel. Yes, but that's of course not enough, because Phil's ruler and pencil ain't enough. You've got to have experts. And so that's where we had to bring in somebody who's got access to the computer programs that allow us to confirm the results that we've got. But I'll tell you what, just get in there, give me a hell of a buzz.
And those other pits, those rubbish filled pits, what are they all about? How is the site being used when those enormous posts were there? How is the site being used around them?
Well, it's absolutely true, Helen. You've hit the nail on the head. First of all, you've got to establish that the post pits and the posts are the same date of the pits. Now, luckily enough, the pits had so much pottery, bone, antler, flint in them, charcoal. We were spoilt for choice for radiocarbon dates. And we'd probably got about at least 40 radiocarbon dates from the site. And the results there have been just totally embarrassing, because they stack up like a pile of coins. Basically, that site was used for quite a short period of time. But the crucial thing is that when we took samples from the post pits, they're also the same date. And so we can say that the refuse in the pits relates directly to what was going on with the post pits. The material in them was a lot of refuse in there, what you call domestic refuse, the sort of stuff that your food waste, pots, broken pots, bone, like I say, flint. But there's also quite unusual objects, carved chalk, which you don't normally expect to find, and aurochs, bones. Now, when you get aurochs on a site, aurochs is, well, you probably know, a massive wild cow, stands about 6 feet at the shoulders, has got a hell of a lot of meat on it. You can feed a lot of people on an aurochs, and it usually means if you've got aurochs on site, then you're probably looking at feasting and celebrations. It is not the sort of animal that you would expect to eat on a day-to-day menu. So once you've got that connection between the solstices and the alignments like that, you only got to see what happens at Stonehenge and will be happening at Stonehenge in a few days' time. Tens of thousands of people will descend on Stonehenge and they will celebrate. Okay, there won't be the feasting, but there will be the celebration, there will be the ceremonies. It is an incredibly important part of the year, both in the midsummer and in the midwinter. And I think this what gives you an idea. I'm sure that people were coming from all over Britain to celebrate. We know that the pots that we got at Bulford are highly influenced by the designs and forms that you get on Orkney. So there's a lot of influences coming down from Orkney. And the only way you can do that is with people. You don't send a digital image, you don't phone people up, you don't text them. The only way you can do it is physical contact, and those ideas and movements is all to do with populations moving around. And we know people did move around a hell of a lot. Once they're at Bulford, they can go there to celebrate. But the other remembering thing you've got to remember is that the dates at Stonehenge, phase 1, the bank and ditch, are exactly the same as we got at Bulford. So the tantalising possibility there is that people at Bulford, let's call it a navvy camp. Is this a navvy camp for people who on a daily basis walked up to Stonehenge to help build the bank and ditch? We don't know. It's total speculation, but it's a nice idea, and it is a possibility of telling us people they don't just come for the solstice, they come to construct Stonehenge.
It's such an exciting thought, and particularly exciting. You mentioned Orkney. Time Team is off to the Nessa Brodka very, very soon indeed. We're really excited about that. So how on earth would people have been going from Orkney all the way in the very, very, very top of the country down to Bulford? How often would that journey have been happening? Why would they have been going all of that way?
Well, I mean, all we can say for sure is that people did move around. And I mean, the connections between northern Scotland and Bulford and Stonehenge have been thrown into a greater light just recently by the likelihood or the possibility that the altar stone at Stonehenge comes not from Wales or the Midlands of England, but from northern Scotland. You've got the pots coming down from Orkney, or the ideas. So the clays at Bulford are local clays, but there are some decorative motifs on the pots at Bulford which are very, very distinctive. Those decorative motifs also appear on pots on Orkney. You could take that shirt of pot from Bulford, drop it into a collection on Orkney, and you would not know that they're separated by such a distance. That is the impact of those potting techniques was having on potters in Wiltshire. Like I say, you've also got the possibility that the altar stone was coming down from northern Scotland. There's also a mace head, a stone mace head that was found at Stonehenge that comes from probably comes from the Isle of Lewis. So there are a whole load of influences that are coming down, and you have to accept the fact that this was happening. And whether or not it was individuals making the route from north to south, or whether I passed the information on to you 20 miles down and they passed it on another 20 and you then carried on rotating all the way down, we shall never know, or we certainly not in my lifetime will probably never know. But all we can say is that people were doing this, and people were coming over from the continent. We know that. People were mobile. They were moving around.
So there would have been people moving, of course, just the 5 kilometres, the 3 miles between the Stonehenge site and the Bulford site. How, though, do we know, what evidence do we have that one site influenced the other? I mean, the alignment could be a coincidence, or it could be that two independent groups decided that they were going to line up with the solstices completely separately.
I mean, it's possible that we have two separate alignments. I mean, what we don't know is that the alignment was being done at Stonehenge at this time. We know that the alignment was being done at Stonehenge 500 years later when they brought the big stones in. We know that because it still works today, because the stones are still there. But if at Stonehenge, the first phase of Stonehenge, Bulford is organic, it's wooden. So you have wooden posts, they rot, or you take them out. You've got no evidence that they exist. You could have the same thing happening at Stonehenge at the same time, but we simply don't know that because the evidence does not survive. What I think we are probably all agreed on is that even if they were separate groups, one living in Bulford and one somehow existing in Stonehenge, they would have been aware of one another. And I think that's the important thing, that the two sites would have been mutually compatible, if you like. People at Bulford may well have gone to Stonehenge and vice versa if it's two different groups of people. But it could be that one group is living... Bulford's got far better water supply. Water is much nearer to the river than Stonehenge is. One of the questions is, where do they live at Stonehenge? If people are living up at Stonehenge, where are they getting their water from? It's quite a long way. It's 5 kilometres to the river. That's quite a long way to take your water. So why not live near your water source? And 5 kilometres, so it's an hour or so's walk to work in the morning, an hour and what? It's peanuts, really.
Well, you're probably the wrong person to ask about this, Phil, and I accept that I'm not going to get a completely fair and balanced answer here. But why? What is so special about this bit of Salisbury Plain? What? I know it's your favourite place in the whole world, but why?
Well,
why is it? Why is it so important?
Why you ask me a question like that? You ask me a question like that, Helen. You know what the answer is. It's because it's in Wiltshire, isn't it? Every fool knows that. And Wiltshire's the centre of the universe. Next question. No, look. Salisbury Plain has got so much going for it. It's a big open space, and we now know that in the Neolithic period it was not this heavily wooded, heavily forested landscape, that it was largely open. So you've got vast open spaces where if you want to plot the sunshine or the sunrise, you've got a better chance of actually seeing the horizon. It's not going to be constrained by woodland all the way round you. You've got the opportunity of vast open spaces. If you want to start doing simple agriculture, the soils on the chalk are easily cultivated. They're well drained. On an area like that, you've also got masses and masses of flint. You've got to remember you're working in the Stone Age, so you're not short of raw materials to make your stone tools. Also, I think the location is absolutely paramount. Somebody I was talking to yesterday mentioned the word hub. It's a word that I love to use about Salisbury Plain because it's this block of land in the middle, and then a bit like the hub of a wheel. and you've got these spokes going out. The Dorset Downs going down towards the southwest, the South Downs trending along to Sussex, the North Downs going along towards Kent, and the Chilterns going up through East Anglia up to Flamborough Head. These are natural routeways, natural ridgeways that funnel people into areas like Salisbury Plain. That to me is probably a better, more realistic explanation than sadly the fact that it's the centre of the universe. But there we go.
In a way, the Orkney situation, that it's surrounded by sea, so you can travel to it very easily. Salisbury Plain is like the equivalent of an island of chalk, so it's really easy to get to. It's visible. Yeah, that persuades me. I've always wondered that. It's really great to be able to ask the question.
It's just such an exciting discovery, and it's just got so many people talking. It's been brilliant, Phil, that you've been able to come and talk to us about it. I just thought, just before we say goodbye, just put into words, if you can, and you've already done it a little bit, but just how important is this for you personally, this discovery?
Well, it's the greatest find of my career. I mean, when people talk about finds, and I get asked quite a lot, what's your best find? And they always expect me to say, to produce an object, to open up a bag and produce a flint tool or something like that. This constitutes a find in my book. I cannot put it in a bag. I cannot label it. I cannot show it to you because it's not there, but I know it's there. People who say, I love to feel, the last person who touched this 10,000 years, I wonder, or 5,000 years ago, I wonder who they were and all the rest of it. This goes beyond an individual making something. This goes around a whole community and what that natural event of the sun coming up and going down. It tells you so much more about the Neolithic people than one individual who might have made a flint scraper.
Thank you, Phil. It's been really great to see you again and to hear about this absolutely extraordinary and wonderful site, and to hear so much about the surrounding landscape as well. It's been a treat. Thank you very much.
And it's really good to see you too, Helen. Great to see you. Cheers.
Now, it's really interesting that people tend to interpret this as evidence of religion. And of course, in a way it is, but in a way, I also feel that it's also showing us an incredibly early example of science. And the two aren't really so different. Until a couple of 100 years ago, the aim of any kind of inquiry into the natural world was done so that you could find out more about the ways of the gods. You could then bring in your religious specialists to talk to the gods, or to pray to them, or to sacrifice to them, or do whatever you thought they wanted. And that would ensure that life went on in the best possible manner. But it's not maybe religion in this same kind of personal way as we think of it today. The other thing I thought about this was noting how the sun rises and sets every day across the year. It's actually quite a simple thing to do. All you need is a couple of people who are prepared to get up early and go to bed late, and a series of posts to mark their observations in the landscape. You mark the sunrise every day, and you see when it stops getting earlier and starts getting later. And that's the moment that the sun stands still. Not too difficult to observe, but it's what you do with that information. It's how it affects wider society that's so important. And if this information is so powerful, so crucial to society, that hundreds of years later it's developed into something on the scale of Stonehenge, well, that really is telling us something remarkable.
It really is, isn't it? I just love all this stuff. Let's keep it going, shall we? And speak to Dr. Fabio Silva, who is a skyscape archaeologist at Stone and Sky, and also Skyscape Academy. And Fabio actually conducted the analysis that confirmed this alignment, which is very, very exciting. I mean, Fabio, how are you feeling today?
Well, I'm feeling great. This is it's fantastic to get the deserving attention that this discovery needs. When Phil and Matt approached me to join the project and test this hypothesis, all they had was literally a line that was drawn on a map, which was very close, if not exactly the same line as the one at Stonehenge that points to the midsummer sunrise on one side and the midwinter sunset on the other. And they asked me to check if it's accurate, if it's intentional. If it isn't, then, or if we can't be sure, then how likely are we to be sure that this was a feature of the site at Bulford? Routinely, what I would do is go on site to see the landscape myself and take the measurements myself. But of course, we couldn't do that anymore because the site had been excavated almost 10 years ago, and those houses were built on site. And the houses and trees surrounding the houses actually block these sight lines. So we had to rely on a reconstruction of the landscape. And that involved acquiring some LiDAR data for the area around Bulford and using typical GIS tools that archaeologists are familiar with to reconstruct the entire landscape devoid of modern housing, devoid of trees. So the next step was really to put the post pits in that landscape. And of course, we need to see the posts themselves. And that involved a lot of conversations with Phil, trying to figure out how wide and how tall these posts would have been. And what we decided to do was to basically use what we believe to be the maximum width of these posts, which is about 0.5 meter, because that's the base of those pits. It wouldn't have been wider than that, but it could have been obviously narrower. So we started with half a meter wide, and then there's the question of how tall. That's always what everyone wants to know. That's always a big unknown, but we know these pits were about 1 meter deep. So using typical 1-to-3 ratios that we see in other places around the world, then it would suggest that it may have been, say, 2 to 4 meters high. So we put that in the landscape. And then, of course, the real reason why I was brought in is to put the sky into the mixture. And that's really where my expertise comes in, which is the astronomy side of things. The stars move quite a lot. And when I say they move, they rise and set in a different position now than they would have done 5,000 years ago. Quite dramatically, in fact. The sun and the moon and the planet also have a small change, but it's only about 1 degree. And 1 degree may sound like it's not a lot, but actually it's exactly the width of 2 sun disks. So if you had 2 suns next to each other, it would be that amount. Which means that for a very precise alignment, if they were intending to get a very precise alignment, if you miss it by 1 degree, it would be very noticeable that you've missed it. It quickly became apparent that if we were treating the posts as mathematical points, as Phil did when he drew that line on the map, then the alignment would actually be off by 1 degree. But when we take the physicality of the posts into account, the fact that they're not mathematical points that are infinitesimally small, but they have a width, they have a height, and we place them in the landscape, then it became clear that actually the alignment was accurate. That if we stand back enough from the posts, which we would have to do, otherwise the post would be right in front of us and we wouldn't be able to see anything. Once we step back 10 meters, then the 2 posts actually create a range of orientations, which is about 1 degree. And the sun would rise at midsummer and set at midwinter, exactly in the middle of that range.
You talked about how exciting this has been, for you personally, and Phil said it's the highlight of his career. It sounds like it's very much the highlight of yours as well. How much, though, do you think it changes our understanding of Stonehenge?
For me, the biggest thing is that it gives us another point in time within this landscape where there was a clear interest in the solstices and an evolution in how they were being architecturally monumentalized. Because what we have at Bulford is perhaps the simplest way to create an alignment. 2 posts, 120 meters apart, okay, perhaps not so close, but it's nowhere near the complexity of later Woodhenge and, of course, 100 or 150 years later, Sarsen, Stonehenge. They had to know what they were doing, because once those stones went down, they would not be able to fix it, certainly not easily. Stonehenge doesn't, or at least this aspect of Stonehenge, no longer pops up out of nowhere. There is a long history in this landscape.
You said earlier on that normally when you go out onto site, or routinely, I think you said, how often do you think that we might be finding these things and simply not spotting them? If you're not called in, who else would spot them?
Once you have alignment, they're going to hit something in the sky. So the trick is always trying to discern whether it was intentional or not. And for that, actually, we need to look at the broad archaeological evidence, the context, both within the site and within the region. There was a very comprehensive study in the island of Ireland looking at the orientations of passage graves, because, of course, we have Newgrange in Ireland. That is probably the second most famous alignment in the world after Stonehenge, with its orientation towards the midwinter sunrise. But what about the other passage graves? And out of just over 100 that are still extant and can be surveyed in this way, only about 14% actually had alignments to the sun. That tells me that they're not as ubiquitous as one might think, but they're clearly part of the story. They're just not the whole story.
Yes, there's just so much to think about there, isn't there? Because the solstice alignments are the ones that we can externally calibrate. We know that they're fixed to something that we would all recognise as being something objective and real. Whereas if I aligned my passage grave to the sunrise on my birthday, I'd be doing fine because my birthday's the 23rd of June. But for example, other people may not be so lucky. So it might be socially derived things that we just can't see externally. There's just so much to think about and so much to discover, isn't there? Yeah, well, thank you so much, Fabio. It's been really illuminating talking to you. And in fact, Time Team members can learn even more about these discoveries because the whole project was conducted on Ministry of Defence land near Bulford, overseen by Time Team's Richard Osgood, who's an MOD archaeologist. That's his day job. And Time Team members can listen to a bonus podcast with Richard right now, where he is talking about the excavation itself and some of the challenges that Phil and his team faced when carrying out their work. And you can visit patreon.com/timeteamofficial to find out more. And of course, you can also see more about Stonehenge on YouTube. The Time Team classic Journey to Stonehenge, which features Tony, Mick and Phil, is available to watch on YouTube right now.
And now a word from Time Team's Sir Tony Robinson.
Have you got an archaeological mystery you'd like Time Team to solve? If so, we'd love to hear from you. If you're part of a community group or an archaeological society, or you're someone who enjoys scanning images of your local landscape on LiDAR, or you're just someone who's discovered an unusual feature in your local village and no one seems to know much about it, go to our website or the email address on the screen. We're always excited to hear from people who want to connect with the archaeology on their doorstep.
Yes, we want to hear from you. Time Team could be unravelling the mystery of your local area, but we do need to know about it first.
And here to explain more is Karen Kirk, one of our Time Team producers, and it's Karen's job to scour the world for possible sites for our archaeologists to visit. Now, Karen, what are you asking people to do?
I'm asking people to get in touch with Time Team. Don't be afraid. We've got an email now, newdigs@timeteamdigital.com. Write to me. Tell me if you've got a really weird lump and bump in your village. You go for a dog walk and you look at the fields and think, oh, there's some strange lumps and bumps. The crops are not quite growing in a particular area. Or you have an absolute fetish for maps and LiDAR and you've been scouting from your sofa on the computer online and you've spotted some really crazy things. I just want to hear about anything that you've got.
This is so exciting because it's an opportunity for people who are fans of Time Team to make a real contribution to Time Team by suggesting some actual archaeology. So we're asking you to be the eyes and ears. We're asking you to be the researchers, to be the initial archaeologists here on the ground for us. How would people know if they'd come across something that was sort of Time Team worthy, Karen? What should people look out for to make them go, oh, this could be just what they're looking for?
Mysteries and a quest. So if you're asking the question yourself, what is it? What date could it be? How does it fit into my village or the town? Stuff doesn't look quite right. There's a weird wall somewhere. We've had instances of, huge mounds in people's back gardens and that, they've been sledging down it all their lives, but actually they've never thought about what it might be. And then suddenly think, okay, well, what could it be? Just questions. The human condition wants to know what something is, and maybe we can come in and help.
What about metal detector finds?
Fabulous. So many Time Team sites have come to us from metal detecting because, metal detectorists are out there looking for sites themselves, doing it right, recording your finds, telling us we can do an archaeological evaluation of the site. We can actually help put those places on the map and understand them.
So how do people get in touch with you again?
We've set up a new email address to make it as easy as possible. We don't want to put you off. You can write one line and say, I've got this, or you can write me a whole paragraph of all the stuff that you've been doing at newdigs@timeteamdigital.com. We're going to write it all down here. Martyn's going to put it out for everybody. And you can go to our website as well, because that will push you on through to be able to get hold of us. And I'll try and reach out to as many people as possible because we want to help.
We do. That email address one more time, then newdigs@timeteamdigital.com. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it from the Time Team podcast for today. Now, don't forget that Time Team members get a bonus episode with Richard Osgood, telling you even more about the exciting Stonehenge excavation. Go to patreon.com/timeteamofficial for that and loads more from Time Team.
And we'll speak to you next week when Helen's answering questions from Time Team members. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.